everyone. Welcome. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the curator of public programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. Thank you for joining us today, this afternoon, or tonight, depending on where it is you're tuning in from across the world. The Fowler Museum is pleased to be co-presenting today's program with Rogue Agency, The Art of Trash with Benjamin Von Wong. This program is part of the Fowler Share the Mic series, which shares our platform with thought leaders, artists, activists, and allies who are guiding us along the arc of justice. In honor of Earth Day, we are celebrating the work of photographer, installation artist, and environmental activist Benjamin Von Wong. We'll begin with a review of some of Benjamin's images, which regularly go viral, combining everyday recycled objects with shocking statistics and generating over 100 million views to inspire action on such urgent concerns as ocean plastics, electronic waste, and fashion pollution. A conversation will follow with Maddy Pryor, founder and CEO of Rogue Agency, about intersections of sustainability and art, how crises can catalyze growth, and how one can measure the impact of art and activism. First, a bit about our guests. Benjamin Von Wong's work lies at the intersection of fantasy and photography. He is a well-known environmental activist, keynote speaker, and host of the Impact Everywhere podcast, in which he interviews a wide range of guests, from NASA scientists to local artists and entrepreneurs. His photography has attracted the attention of corporations like Starbucks, Dell, and Nike. Most recently, he was named one of Adweek's 11 Branded Content Masterminds. He is a creative advisor for the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network and the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. Rogue Agency is a creative agency dedicated to amplifying the voices of purpose-driven brands and organizations through compelling digital campaigns and authentic brand storytelling. They represent clients who are committed to innovation, representation, sustainability, and equity. Maddy Pryor is an experienced marketing strategist and creative director. Her diverse array of experience led her to found Rogue Agency in January 2018, committing her skill set wholeheartedly to purpose-driven marketing of consumer brands, NGOs, and government organizations, including LA's Department of Mental Health. Before we get going, 2 quick bits of technical housekeeping. Once the screen sharing begins, I encourage you to click View Options and then select side-by-side mode so the video feed doesn't cover any of the presentation. And if you have any questions during this program, please do submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote questions that you would like to be considered to be answered at the end of the program. All right, over to you, Benjamin and Maddy.
Thank you, Bianca. Really appreciate that introduction. Happy Earth Day, everyone. We are so honored to be here with the Fowler Museum. I'm honored to be here with Benjamin Von Wong, an incredible artist, a dear friend, and this conversation has been a long time coming. So without further ado, Ben, I'll turn it over to you and we can work through some of your work.
Amazing. Looking forward to having this conversation. Thank you for having me, and good morning, evening, afternoon, everyone, depending on where you happen to be. To start off, I guess I'm going to do a quick little presentation of my work. I always find that as a visual artist, it's a little bit easier to show my work first off before just talking about it. So real quick, this is only going to be about 10 minutes long. My name is Benjamin Von Wong, and this is the kind of work that I create. I think that many people look at my work, and the first question they ask themselves is, what am I looking at? Is it real? Is it fake? And that curiosity is super important because it gives us an opportunity to start a conversation. And I want people to wonder, because then when they ask that question, I can say, well, actually, let me tell you a little bit more about this. This is a photograph, and it was actually a photograph of an art installation that we built. And this art installation was made out of wood with some LED lights in the background, which is why the entire structure is glowing. And we built this inside of a mall over the course of 2 weeks with the help of hundreds of volunteers, because I don't actually know how to build anything. So I need help from people to come together to help me bring these projects to life. And those little objects that we made it out of, well, those are straws. Those are 168,000 plastic straws, not because straws are the most deadly thing in the ocean, but because we wanted to show how small little actions really add up over time. And so over 9 months, volunteers across the country collected straws, and then we had to collect them, sort them, organize, clean them, and build them up into a Guinness World Record art installation in order to raise awareness for plastic pollution. So I think the role of art is really interesting because when we think of transformation or behavioral change, we often think that facts alone are going to do it. And if only we could better communicate the reasons why it's important to stop consuming certain products, then people would do that. But I think humans are a little different than that, right? We don't just do things because they're 100% rational. We do things because we're emotionally connected to them, and that's the kind of gap that I hope to close with my art. And so, for example, if we take the statistic of every 60 seconds, a truckload of plastic flows into the ocean, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And so on this project with Greenpeace, we went there onto an island that had no drinking water. And within a week, we collected a truckload of plastic, tied it all together, brought it onto location in order to bring this entire project to life, to highlight how much plastic is actually flowing into the ocean every 60 seconds and how single individual actions alone might not be enough. We need the cooperation of corporations and governments along the way. I also see art as an opportunity to highlight invisible issues. Let's take the clothing that we wear as an example. Polyester, nylon, spandex. All of these are synthetic materials that when you put them into your laundry machine and you spin it up and it kind of tries to release all the dust and dirt out of its fabric, it's also releasing pieces of microfibers. So much so that 92% of US tap water contains traces of microplastics. But how do we learn about these issues? Well, oftentimes there are these scientific reports, maybe a breakthrough report here and there, but if you're not paying attention to this, chances are you're not really looking at it. And I think even if you are paying attention to it once you've heard it once, you don't really stumble across it again. So how do we invite more people into this conversation? For me, it's once again art and collaboration. And so by working with students at Georgetown University that were trying to tackle this problem, we came up with this metaphor that, if we're putting clothing inside of a laundry machine and it's coming back to haunt us, why not just create monsters crawling out of a laundry machine? And so this was just a little campaign that we pulled together to highlight how it was coming back and threatening our future or the future generations, and how it's something that we really needed to pay attention to. And so art has this power, I think, of drawing more people into the conversation by igniting a sense of curiosity so that we can educate through adventure. Along the way, it's not like I know about all the problems in the world and I come in and I try to tackle it. It's more like I do presentations like these and people who are inspired reach out to me and they say, hey, I really loved what you did. Have you ever thought of doing a project like X or like Y? And so at one of these conferences that I spoke at South by Southwest, there was Dell, the computer company, was sitting in the audience and asked, hey, do you think it would be possible to do the same thing that you do with waste, with electronic waste? And I didn't know anything about electronic waste. Turns out it's the fastest growing waste stream, and less than 15% of electronic waste is recycled every single year. And so I thought, why not collaborate? Why not try to talk about how they are recycling all of these products, whether they're their own brands or not, as long as consumers can bring them back, and then upcycling them into their new products. And so I come up with ideas and I try to make these ideas as relatable as possible. I try to think of new and exciting ways to show that at the end of the day, it's not just about like having a lot of resources that you need to pull something together. You can be clever about it. In this case, I wanted to create this really cool pattern of laptops on the ground using just chalk, a yardstick, and some math, and a rope. And then we recreated this sort of solar field farm that I had seen, I think, in the opening scene of Blade Runner, right? So I kind of stole that visual reference. And then I combined it with the wall that we built. And this wall was built out of just mice, Ethernet cables, adapters, all the pieces of electronics that people often forget about, and decorated it in the shape of circuit boards. And then we took everyone's favorite electronic character from Tron and just got inspired by those patterns. And we smashed all of these familiar elements together to create something that was unique and different and hopefully just enough to strike up a conversation with people. And so I wanted to show how past devices could be used to power future technologies. So along the way, I guess maybe one quick lesson that I'd like to share with all of you is that it's really important to try to position yourself to be the guide and not the hero. It's not so much about saying, this is something that I did, but this is something that we did together as a community with the help of hundreds of volunteers coming together in order to make something happen. And sure, there was a little bit of a destination, a little bit of leadership on that front. But at the end of the day, true change only happens when we come together. speaking of change, I think we often forget about how change happens when it comes to the arts. And I think it's because it's really hard to measure. So I wanted to talk about real quick, what change means to me as an artist. And maybe the best way to summarize that is a comment someone left me recently in the beginning of the year. Someone reached out and said, hey, someone copied your mermaid project. And I think as an artist, you don't want people to copy you. But as an activist, you want everyone to copy you. So I was curious. I went to go see, what is this mermaid lying on a trash heap that I should check out? And I stumbled across this horrifying scene. So for those of you who don't know, this is kind of what happens every single year on the coast of Badung, where there's 250 tons of waste that are collected by volunteers and government officials and anyone who wants to show up really to clean up the beach. Because this kind of thing happens every single year, every season, over and over again. And it's only getting worse with time. And so one of the volunteers decided that it would be cool to dress herself up as a mermaid, and so ended up creating this series that turned out to be pretty popular on social media. And I thought, what an awesome initiative, right? And so for context, this is the kind of work that I created. So very different, very stylized, but I created this all the way back in 2016. And so there's probably some inspiration that was drawn from this series, but at the same time, I don't think it really matters, because I tried to communicate an idea that resonated with me in a situation, in a style that worked for me. In this case, it was inside of a warehouse, and I had the privilege of just collecting the trash, cleaning it, photographing it, and then putting it all back in the recycling center and returning it back to where it came from. And I think many people don't get that same luxury. And so, I think when we create campaigns like this as artists, we create a whole bunch of images, and we think that success looks like this. It looks like getting coverage. It looks like getting accolades, maybe some awards. And oftentimes this is kind of what it takes in order to get work and to survive and to thrive. But as an activist, I think the best headlines aren't headlines that are written about you. They're actually headlines that are not written about you. They're written about other people. So in February of this year, I received a Google alert for my name, and I was like, that's interesting. I wasn't covered on Vice recently. I don't understand why. And it turns out that this lady, this entrepreneur in Wuhan, China, that everyone knows where that is now, that I had never heard of before, I'd never spoken to. Her name is Huang Ningning, and she started a fashion business to upcycle bags and shirts that were made from recycled plastics. And the reason I got a notification is because she credited my photographs for the reason that she quit her day job to start this company. And so how amazing it is that in a year of the pandemic, where I especially have felt particularly helpless since my superpower is to gather people, and that these images can continue to affect change year after year after year. And it doesn't matter that this is something that was created that was quote unquote old. It's still new for anyone who's never seen it, just like hopefully some of the people here in the audience today. And so I guess what I wanted to conclude my quick little presentation on is that art at the end of the day is an infinite resource. It's something that can never be used up. We create it once, and as long as it still has relevance to people in a place, then at the end of the day, it'll continue to resonate with you, and it'll continue to create change. And so I guess that's kind of what I wanted to share today. And with that, I'm going to be handing control back to Maddy, so that we can go into conversation mode. So thank you guys for listening.
Yes, thank you, Ben. That was incredible, and it's always so impactful to look at your work all lined up like that, these incredible, fantastical images that have such a strong message. I want to start by exploring your intersection, the intersection between art and activism. It's one that the Fowler Museum also explores through the Share the Mic series. And so I'd love to hear from you, what makes this intersection so special? What makes artists so well equipped to also be activists?
Well, I mean, I think art is usually created from a place of personal connection, first and foremost, right? You have some connection to the art that you're creating. You have something to say, some interpretation, and good art difference between art and entertainment for me is like art will help shift perspectives, and it will create a conversation in a way that is different than something that's ever been seen before. Art isn't prescriptive. It's not something where you say, I'm going to tell you how to do something, but rather I'm going to show you something that I see in a different way so that you can hopefully see the world in a different way. And I think in many ways that combination of something really personal, deeply personal to one, and that intention of helping people see the world in a way they hadn't seen before makes art so kind of subtle and nuanced and interesting, for where it can have the biggest impact on a very small number of people, or it can have a small impact on a really large number of people. And you never really know which one it's going to be until you've gotten out there and you've created it.
Absolutely. You said something the other day that really compelled and inspired me, which is your work intends to make the invisible visible. And I just find that so compelling, because so often these issues that surround the environmentalist space are illustrated through data and graphs and charts and, scientific measure. And so I'd love to hear a little more about how you breathe color and life and shape and even emotion into a space that's previously been, quite dry.
I mean, I think I just try to steal as many visual metaphors as possible from popular culture. I think people relate to things that they can kind of see themselves in, and that seeing of yourself in something can be a wide variety of things. And on a visual front, for me, it's borrowing from fantasy and fiction and movies, and I try to find these visual references that give the work a sense of familiarity. If we take, let's say, Strawpocalypse as an example, the first image I opened up with, we see the parting of the plastic sea, but I think almost every culture has heard of the parting of the oceans, as told by the Bible. And so I just kind of appropriated that metaphor and readapted it, because if by 2050 there might be more plastic than fish in the sea, well, what would happen if you parted the oceans? And so I kind of try to steal things that people have already heard about. And I think that gives a sense of connection between the viewer and the art. And of course, it doesn't work for everything, but we can try as much as possible to create those relational contact points. I think of the project when I put a mermaid on 10,000 plastic bottles. A mermaid is part of everyone's childhood. It's part of this mythical world where the oceans are clean and never get polluted. It's beautiful. It's mysterious. We can breathe underwater. Who knows? It's almost like exploring another world. But now you're taking that and you're bringing it into reality of today. And so this juxtaposition of stories that we already kind of know or may have visually in the back of our mind somewhere that you can bring into the forefront and recontextualize people, I think is just a really, I don't know, it's what I try to do with my work. I find it to be a very interesting strategy to create a sense of familiarity. I think things that are too weird, and I'm sure everyone's had this experience where you go to like a museum and you look at a piece of art and you're just like, I don't get it. I think my work kind of falls a little bit more on the popular side of things, where I try to ground it in something that is popular in nature, and go from there as a starting point. Since ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason I create, or what I actually aspire to, is to create symbols that people can use in order to communicate what they believe, but don't necessarily have the words for.
Iconic, right? Like creating icons that relate to people's emotions. And I think that sense of familiarity does invoke emotion in the viewer, right? Like we have these preconceived connections with these certain icons, and then you put them in a new light to inspire awe or humor or a feeling of gravity and somberness. And so there really is an emotional invocation in your work that is really powerful. And you cross the spectrum, right? Like some are humorous and some are deep and impactful. So how do you choose which emotion to invoke, and why do you go those specific routes?
So in order for things to spread, there are different kinds of emotions that spread better than others. So you have active emotions and passive emotions. On the active side, you might have disgust, outrage, anger. But you might also have shock and awe and curiosity, right? So there's a positive and negative. And then on the like passive emotion side, you might have something like sadness or apathy, which causes you to shut down and just be like, "Oh, I don't want to hear about this. This is just going to like ruin my day. So I'm just going to tune off." And so when we look at social media, we can see that outrage and disgust and all those emotions have been doing really well. They perform very well. And I think it's just simply human nature where we grew up to evolve to pay attention to the threats in the world. And so we kind of add fuel to the fire on that front. I try as much as possible to kind of add a little positive spin to that, where you combine the sensations of shock and awe with a layer of beauty, like kind of an on-ramp to invite people on board. But I think very much in all the projects that I do, the ultimate goal is always to invite a sense of curiosity. I don't think people change because you tell them to. I think people change when they want to find a way to change. And if you are simply pointing the path at different ways that they can get to something that they're looking for already, that's like a far better place to be when you're trying to move people from one state into another state. Let's say a state where they don't know anything and a state where they want to take action or so forth. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. You just sparked something for me. I remember when I first started Rogue, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's also a climate change scientist and a futurist, and told him, kind of what Rogue was about and what we would be supporting. And he said, "So glad to hear it. Climate change needs a new marketing team." And that relates in a way to what you're saying, which is people, they are more drawn to issues in which they feel like they can be a part of the solution. And sometimes the tactics of fear or disgust or outrage or even hopelessness that can be surrounding the environmentalist conversation can actually cause shutdown and cause an aversion to even talking about or engaging with the space. And so, how do you find that people respond to your work, and do you feel like it catalyzes change? I know you gave an example, but overall, do you think that that is the on-ramp to people engaging in solutions?
I think it's one tool in our toolbox. I think it's definitely one that shouldn't be ignored. Too often, at every event or every charity event, you might see artists are invited to perform for free or contribute their art for free, but that's not sustainable too, right? And so I feel like art has a role to play. Science has a role to play. Media and corporations and governments all have a role to play. And I just happen to, I mean, I'm an artist, I think, less by choice and more by just a series of unexpected events where I try to do the best I can with what I have. The reactions that I've had from people, they range. I mean, you get the trolls who go, "Why'd you, like, you taking the time to do this for months at a time is the biggest waste of time and energy ever. I don't know why you're doing it." And then on the flip side, you'll have people go like, "Wow, I share your work in my schools all the time, and the students just stop whatever it is they're doing and they stare at it, and suddenly it's like the only way I can get them interested in the environmental issue, because it shows that it can be cool in a different light." And so you kind of get like both spectrums. But art is a dance. Like I said a little bit earlier, it's not prescriptive. So by definition, there are some people who are gonna like what you do, and there are others who won't like it. I say by and large, given the fact that the content spreads and seems to resonate, and it resurfaces over and over again, I would like to think that it matters and it moves people. And I think one of the interesting things, because I haven't always been an environmentalist, but when you decide to create work or art that tackles a problem that isn't going away, it makes that work more or less timeless, right? Because the issue that I created, the mermaid on 10,000 plastic bottles in 2016, is just as relevant then as it was now. And it still gets published and featured in magazines today. Whereas a lot of the fantasy work that I used to do that was based around novelty and unexpectedness, once it's been done, and nobody talks about it ever again. And so I think there's true value in finding the things that you're passionate about and figuring out how your voice can help to move the needle, even if it feels really, really small, because that kind of difference compounds over time, just like our small habits make a big difference over time.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the connection that I was about to make, is that in the same way that the work will continue to get in front of people and will continue to make changes and have this ripple effect, I love that it's mirrored by the fact that your work also speaks to the small incremental changes of the people that it, hopefully inspires, and that it certainly has inspired. It continues to reinforce the idea that small habitual changes do make a difference and can add up. And I think that's an incredibly encouraging message in this space right now, to be reminded of your personal power.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's easy. Maybe a good way to think about it is that no one person can ever change the world. I mean, Hollywood and the media might make you feel that way, that one person's going to come in and swoop up and change the world. But by and large, we can't change the world, but we can change how we interact with the world. And if we can make whatever the world we want to see happen, if we can manifest that within our own lives, and we can make that contagious, and other people start following that lead, then you can change the world. But you change the world together, and you don't change the world alone. You change the world by making that change contagious for everyone else included in this community that we live in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about social impact, because we're tapping on it, but I want to just get your perspective on, what social impact means. And I know you have a bit of a complicated relationship with the term impact and how to measure it, because art is, like you said, an infinite resource. It's hard to measure the impact of it, but how do you attempt to do that? And at what point do you say, throw your hands up and let it just live in the world and move organically?
Yeah, I think it's the engineering half of me that just really wishes it was possible to measure the impact of art, because I want to know what has changed as a result of the work that I put out in the world. And I think so many of the tools that we have that exist out in the world today to measure impact are these quantitative measurements around the output of what we create. So I can measure how many views I get on something. I can measure how many shares I get or how many comments that come in. But by and large, the more interesting thing to look for are like, what are the outcomes? Like, how have people shifted as a result of seeing this thing? But those kind of, if we were to do this longitudinal survey to figure out if one piece of work has truly made an impression on someone over the course of time, well, it becomes very unwieldy very quickly. And I just started to, think. And so I started my podcast to specifically address this question, where I was just asking all sorts of people, coming at impact from so many different directions to better understand what kind of, how they measure impact. And I started to think, after talking with a NASA scientist, that maybe I was looking at it from the wrong perspective. Maybe I was starting at the wrong place, trying to measure impact. It's like saying, it's like trying to measure how much you love somebody based on the number of hours of eye contact you have with the person per day, or the number of dollars that flow from your hands to their hands. And it's just this weird abstraction of love, but then you'll never quite get to the essence of it. So am I asking the right question by saying, oh, I wish I could measure the impact of art? And so I guess my evolving thesis is just impact happens in kind of two different parts when it comes to the art itself. There is the process of creation, in which you engage all sorts of people, bring them together, and spark all sorts of new ideas and new states of being that weren't there. And so you've instigated a number of change. Maybe a very practical example of that might be, let's say you put on a course for PTSD veterans to learn how to weld, and they're coming and they're welding week after week, and it doesn't actually matter what they create, But bringing them together and giving them a sense of community, that's where the impact actually lies, right? So the process of creating the art is almost more important than the art itself in that case. So there's process, and then there's output, which is where a lot of my work is located, where I put something out into the world and I'm trying to make sure that whatever it is I put out in the world can be put to use by as many people as possible. And so you kind of have process and output are two places in which you can try to affect change. And then you can do that at the micro level, how you show up in the world every day, how you interact with people, your personal habits. And then there's macro, right? Like what governments have you shifted? What policy have you changed? And so I think it's really less about necessarily being able to measure it, but being conscious that these are all important things and opportunities and places where you can have an impact. So are you consciously taking control of your power, or are you giving away that power and saying, oh, I don't want to think about that piece of it? And maybe that's the most interesting piece of the puzzle, just like with love. If you understand what makes your partner happy, you can figure out how to better do it. You don't actually need to measure to what percentile degree of success you've accomplished it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I asked the question because I know your perspective on it has changed even in the time that I've known you. And there's a lot of problem solving that goes into that, kind of looking at an issue and saying, this is the problem. I really want to unlock this. I've got my engineer brain engaged, and then getting to a place where you realize it's actually not a problem, that the work is doing, its job on a variety of levels. And it's not necessarily the measurement of, the quantity, but the quality and the anecdotal moments that show that it's doing the thing. It's out in the world creating an illustration of an important narrative, and also making little inspirational impact along its path. And so it's been cool to watch that unfold for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Problem solving is such an integral part of what you do kind of in your life, but also through your projects. And if you look at Benjamin's videos, and you'll encounter a lot of videos of how I made it. And there are a lot of twists and turns along the way, a lot of in real time problem solving. And so, Ben, I'd love to hear, what about problem solving energizes you? What keeps you doing it?
I've been having a reflection on this lately, which is like, and I think it was built on a quote, and I don't remember, but it was like some product managers that was basically saying, you don't want to reward people who solve problems at your company, because then you're just going to encourage more problems to occur. because now everyone's going to be looking for problems to solve. What you want to do is reward people who prevent problems from arising in the first place. And I think about that in response to my life, and I realize that I love solving problems. I think there's a satisfaction that comes from knowing that you were able to solve the puzzle. But at the same time, that means like I'm perpetually in some state of crisis, because I'm always looking for problems to solve, and I'm trying to figure out how do you resolve that in your personal life, where you figure out like, is it possible to enjoy the problem solving process without necessarily seeking problems just for the sake of solving them? But anyways, that's kind of, I think, a parallel track. But when it comes to actual like to these big projects, I think when you break them down from these really large, crazy things, you're like, I don't know, I've done a project maybe where we tie a model underwater with some sharks swimming around, and you're like, oh, this is complicated. Like, how do you tie a model? How do you find sharks? How do people breathe? How do you direct them? And it's like, okay, it all sounds really complicated, but like, what if you just break it down? What if you take different bits off? And so if you break it down, you're like, well, first we need to find out, how do you attract a shark? Like, what makes someone in? So you find a shark scientist. And then you're like, okay, how do you tie a model underwater? Well, we need someone who can hold their breath long. And then that's like, okay, now we need a free diver. And then we need a couple safety divers. Well, that could be anyone who has a little bit of experience. Now I need an underwater camera. Where can I borrow that from? We need somewhere to stay. Where can that go? And then suddenly you've broken this like really big idea down into really small parts. And I think every time you solve a piece of the puzzle, anyways, in my case, it feels like a little win, right? Like you get a little bit more confidence. You feel like it's possible. Someone believes you for some reason, And I think I'm addicted to that kind of success train. This idea that like if only you get the ball rolling, that one thing can lead to another thing, and then it can snowball. And that momentum, that feeling of momentum, I think is what I find really, really invigorating.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, when you think about it in that way, it's like those problems could either daunt and drain you, or they could energize you. And so it's cool to see and hear that it's that momentum of the problem solving that really propels you into these projects. I know another piece of these large projects especially is the community that surrounds them. You really call on the people of a particular area to be a part of the project. And I'd love to hear what unfolds with that, what it means to engage an entirely new group of people to work on one particular project.
Yeah. So we sometimes look at people. So like I've people that look at my following, my social media following. So I have 100,000 followers on Instagram, and people go like, "Man, if only I had 100,000 followers, I could do X or I could do Y." And I push back against that because my followers are scattered across the world. And when I do a project, like right now, I'm putting a project together here in Montreal. It's like a fraction. I can probably not reach the people that I actually need to reach to help me here on my project here in Montreal because my following is all over the place. And so to bring these projects together, it's actually not my following that I pull in. It is the local community leaders that I pull in. And so if I'm going to be doing a project on sustainability, I'm going to land in a local environment, and I'm going to look for the people who are working on sustainability issues, and figure out how I can help them by doing the work that I do. And so you look for points of common interests. I think very often when we think of collaboration, we come at it from a perspective of I need or I want in order to do X or Y. And that's fine, but it's really, that means that you have to now, you either have to buy someone else's services, or you kind of get stonewalled, because I think at the end of the day, everyone has something they're trying to accomplish. And if you can figure out how to align their interests with your interests, then you're just helping them do what they wish they could do anyways. And so with my projects, the way I think about it is I'm going to do something so big, it's going to make so much noise, and it's entirely aligned with your sustainability goals or your environmental goals. Can we collaborate together? And the byproduct of that is you end up bringing on board collaborators and partners, as opposed to consultants or employees or people that you hire. And so if I were to give a tangible example of this project that I'm doing right now in Montreal, in order to bring this project together, I need lots of different locations. I need a landfill, I need a recycling facility, I need a beach, like a public beach, I need a container park, and I need all these like public locations. And so I've been going around on LinkedIn, and I've been stalking the marketing and sustainability people. I read up about their sustainability initiatives ahead of time, and I say, hey, I'm putting together this project that's communicating around this issue that I know you also care about, that is aligned with your 2030 goals. I think this would be a wonderful opportunity to join forces, because I'm building this project anyways, and maybe I can help you create some marketing assets along the way. All I need is permission for your facility, and I'm going to bring the entire rest of it. And so now I've gotten a free location. I've now gotten a free megaphone for my work. I've now gotten a bunch of new friends in order to bring these things to life. And it's just, I don't know, like a far more human way to approach the world that just feels so much more exciting, instead of just saying, well, I need a lot of money to pay for things. And that doesn't mean I don't need money. I do need money to pull these projects together. But it lowers the cost. It increases the workload, but it lowers the cost. And I think it also makes the projects more stakeholder based as opposed to shareholder based. And I think there's something really empowering about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, not to mention that it gives visibility and incredible visual assets to these collaborators that come on board. Such a gift to them as well. And so everyone is really truly pointed towards the same goal, which is bringing this to life, but even more so bringing awareness to an issue that everyone's already invested in.
Mm-hmm.
Such a cool approach. And I think it really does empower the local communities of these areas to take ownership, to take part in the conversation, to, you know, be featured by you in many ways. You know, just because you've been touching on it, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about the project that you're working on in Montreal. Maybe give us a teaser so the people listening can stay tuned towards it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you can go check it out. I made a little micro website where I pasted all the things that I'm looking for. It's giantplastictap.com. But I'm basically making a 25-foot tall art installation that is just, so we know the levitating fountains, that kind of a faucet that's kind of pouring water. Well, I decided to just hijack that symbol that is quite familiar and quite relevant, and associate it to a very common phrase in the plastics movement, which is saying we need to turn off the plastic tap. And so instead of water that's flowing out of this faucet, we have just 25 feet of trash that's coming out of it. And the reason I want to do this in a landfill, on a beach, in a recycling facility is because these are all the places where powerful statistics lie, where you say 80% of plastics goes into landfill, or less than 10% of plastics is recycled globally. Or we can talk about the truckload of plastic that flows into the ocean every 60 seconds, which is why we need a photo of this installation on a beach. And so I just think it's this wonderful opportunity to talk about issues and give a visual way to anchor a lot of these statistics that we constantly talk about, that they just like exist in the ether. And also just to like revitalize the conversation. I mean, plastic consumption, single-use plastic consumption has gone up by 250% in the United States over the pandemic. And this is at a time where plastic awareness is at an all-time high. And it's just like, we need to like bring the focus back onto this problem because it's only getting worse. It's only gotten worse. And it's one that isn't going away. And so how do we ensure that the conversation gets brought back without just repeating the same old statistics? Well, once again, I think art is a wonderful excuse to do all of that. And so my goal is actually to reach out to as many nonprofits as possible before the launch to let them know, like, hey, I have this project coming up. If you have an initiative that aligns with this work and you want to use the images to amplify your cause, definitely do it. And please let me know, because I think that's where the power of art lies, right? Like you can't affect people if they never see it. So how do you make sure other people see the art without having a big enough following? Like I have a following, but I don't think it's big enough to change the world. Well, you can borrow the followings of other people. So that same idea of collaboration is being, I think, mirrored along the way.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's such a shift from this idea that art is an exclusive space or a finite resource. It's really turning that on its head and showing that, you know, art is an infinite resource. And it also implements that statement that you made earlier about being the guide versus the hero. Instead of creating gateways that block people from your work, you're actually spreading it out and encouraging people to share it, to use the imagery, to be a part of this process with you. And it is a true shift. It's a really different way to look at the space, to be a leader in the space. And I find it personally really inspiring. I'm sure that's shared with the people on this call. You know, Ben, if there's anything that like advice or words of encouragement before we go into questions from our audience, which I definitely want to get to. I see them popping up. If you have questions, please submit them. We'll take the next little bit to do that. But in terms of how to approach this issue of plastic waste, which is something you focus so much of your work on, how would you encourage consumers generally to take part in it and to approach what can feel like a pretty daunting goal?
I think everyone is in a different part of their journey. And I think this is true not just of plastics. It could be true of climate. It can be true of racial equity. It can be true of the polarization of wealth, or it can be in anything. And what really matters the most at the end of the day is to start and just to do things that you care about and that you're interested in and that you'll be excited about, and to find more allies in. We often think that change is the result of like one person standing up and saying, I'm going to fix the world, but really change is the result of many people standing up together and moving in the same direction for a consistent amount of time. You can't just do it for one day in the year, like Earth Day, and then forget about it the rest of the year. And so it's almost finding what are the smallest things that you can do, that you can embed in your life, that can become habits that constantly remind you of something that matters to you. We talk about, let's say, bringing a water tumbler with you where you go, or water bottle. And while it might feel insignificant, it is a reminder that you are fighting for hope. You're fighting because you're making life a little bit more inconvenient because you believe in something greater than the convenience of just picking something up at the store. And so I think these small shifts for me, the first thing I did that was environmentally related, the first behavioral change I took was just going from meat eating to vegetarian. I was like, oh, this is just one thing I can do that will lower my carbon footprint. And it's a reminder every single day of what I stand for. And at some point, it becomes part of your identity. And then you start taking bigger steps along the way, right? You go from, I don't know, vegetarian to vegan, or you start adding different constraints into your life. And I think for a long time, I've always felt like it's so inconvenient to be an environmentalist because really the most sustainable thing you can do is nothing. But over time, I don't know, there's a certain amount of pride, I guess, this alignment of identity that comes with it. And I think you can look back in time and see well, as a result of this one change that I've kept to, all this change can happen. And it's the same with going to the gym, right? You look, it feels like every single day is a slog and nothing's changing, but you can look back after a year if you've kept it up, something has definitely changed. And it's the same thing, I think, with everything. So if you're struggling to start, if you're struggling to figure out where to go and how to do it, just start with something you're curious about and go find some friends that want to try it with you. And when you can play and when you can experiment and when you can be curious and when you can have fun and you can find other cool people that you resonate with, it just makes the whole journey so much more interesting. It doesn't have to be painful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that idea that it's a reminder for you each day when you make that commitment, but it's also a social signal to those around you that you're committing to this, and it helps, create a ripple effect and create some social equity and encouragement around these behaviors. Rogue definitely sits in a similar place around, it's a process. It's not a perfect practice, and there's no right way to do it. It's about engaging in the ways that you feel the most equipped, and it will beget the next change, and it might beget the change of someone who's influenced by you. So that it is definitely an encouraging outlook. And I want to jump to questions because I'm seeing them popping up.
Cool.
Got a gorgeous one from Alana. Are you or were you inspired by any specific art movements? And if yes, which art movement and would you want to see personified?
I am not. I'm not. I don't actually. I can't even think of an art movement that I'm familiar with because I've never studied art. I have a background as a hard rock mining engineer, and so I actually have no idea how art movements are created or how they happen. I look at what's going on in the NFT space right now, and I'm just like, I don't get it. I mean, I see it's a trend, and it's yeah, but I don't quite get it. If anything, the art movement that I try to always remind myself of is the one that is just to ensure that that you don't become a slave to the art that you create. And I think this is maybe just specifically in reference to social media, where you get kind of typecasted into the expectations of what society is looking for in terms of content creation. And suddenly you're on a schedule and you have to create content and you have to stick to a theme and you're not allowed to change because now all your sponsorships rely on this thing of this identity of who they think you are or who you've become as a result of all the things that you do. And then you get locked into that. And I just feel like so much of social media these days, and maybe it's just a lot of the performative piece of showing up online as a digital character, is that you become a character in a reality TV show. And I try really hard to make sure that, regardless of the ebbs and flows of social media and what is expected of me based on what people think of me, that at the end of the day, I'm still doing something that I believe in, and I'm still doing something that I find excitement and joy in, and to never be beholden to what I should do and just do what I believe needs to be done.
Absolutely. Yeah, social media is a complicated space because it can certainly give your work traction and visibility and, increase the opportunity for impact, but it is also a content gobbling machine, and there's a pressure to be constantly creating. Do you ever feel that pressure to be constantly developing output?
Yeah, I mean, I have ignored it primarily because I guess I have the privilege of ignoring it. I designed my life around, it's more like feast or famine. So I have some projects that pay me for, half a year. One project can pay me for half a year, or I have nothing. And then I'm just like, uh-oh, I have a problem for this half of the year. And I've just kind of always gone for the big bets personally. One thing that I try to constantly remind myself about is that it's not about creating content, it's about creating value. And if you focus on content, then you're just going to put a lot of noise out in the world. If you focus on value, then you can choose how that value manifests in the world. And I think when you focus on value, it's a really good North Star, not only just from like a personal growth perspective, like it feels good to help people, but it's also like, I think, a really good North Star to ensure that what you do is in alignment with what society needs, and just a really good compass to stay centered in life.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. As a company that works a lot in social media, it's certainly a love-hate relationship at times. And you're right, value is the North Star. Is each piece of artwork, content, video content you're putting out serving a purpose, or is it just adding to the fray? And it's good to come back to that. I'll keep that little sound bite close.
Cool.
All right, Richie asks, so much of your work is about using your art and mobilizing the local community to make a difference. What can we do to get our own friend groups and communities interested in improving sustainable practices? How do we make noise about it?
Well, I guess I think I kind of touched upon this in the micro versus macro kind of a way, right? So there is micro in terms of who you are and how you show up in the world. What do you wear? Do you go on like shopping trips? Or where do you eat? What do you eat? What do you bring with you when you go out to eat? What do you choose? What do you choose to broadcast in the world? And I think the biggest influence we have are on the people closest to us. And so that's always a really good place to start. And it's a good place to experiment and play without judgment. And I think it's also important in those kind of like micro moments of change to never take the moral high ground, right? Because everyone's always in a different point on their journey. I don't think there's a need to go around and shame anyone into changing. That often is a really great way to lose friends. So I think as far as getting others interested, it's just by showing up as the best version of yourself, right? Making that contagious. It's like, oh, I want to be I like how this person is showing up in the world. I love that they're living for something greater. Look at how much intention and presence they have when they show up, right? Like those are things that are really compelling, right? And so if you can integrate whatever mission, whether that's, racial equity or sustainability or anything along those lines, that's like probably the best place to start. And if you want to do it from a macro perspective, and let's say you're starting out in your journey and you don't have a following, you're not sure where to start, find allies, like find friends. Like where do the people, where, like if it is sustainability or zero waste that you're looking for, just find a Facebook group, find an event, find something where others who are speaking about the same things that interest you are hanging out. And from there, figure out what they're doing. How are they mobilizing? Are they speaking the right language? Maybe your thing isn't going to participate in cleanups, and maybe you want to be on the solution side of things. So maybe what you're looking for are social entrepreneurship programs. Like there are so many different ways to make a difference. You just have to you have to get the ball rolling. The hardest thing is getting the ball rolling because it just feels daunting. And like, I don't know where to start, da da da. But if you just start, take one step forward every day, search one more thing, at some point, you're going to look back and you'll be like, oh, I've made so much progress. And I think that's just the only way forward, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think also having compassion for yourself and for your process, right? Like,
right. Being nice to yourself is important. Absolutely.
It's again, like, it might be a start and stop. It might be 10 steps forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward. Like it can move that way. And so I think it's important to have compassion for yourself, for those around you. And like you said, leverage the work that's already being done. There are so many people and nonprofits and incredible individuals who are steeped in these spaces. And I mean, like you do, Ben, as you work with people who are, steeped in e-waste space or steeped in plastic-free initiatives, and then you amplify them. There are so many incredible experts in this world who are doing incredible work and can be accessed. And that's a great way to go about it.
Yeah. Can I also say a podcast is a wonderful excuse to talk to people? Because
good point.
Because now you have something to offer them in exchange for a conversation. So that's been how I've been keeping my own serendipity going during the pandemic while I'm not allowed to travel and not allowed to meet people.
Amazing. Yeah. And, as we wrap up, I do want to take an opportunity to plug Ben's podcast, Impact Everywhere. It is such an incredible show and definitely worth listening to. A wide variety of really, really talented guests.
Thank you so much for plugging that.
Yeah. I see Bianca.
Yes, I'm here, and that means that we got to wrap up our program. That was so great, you two. That was such an interesting hour. Thank you so much, Maddy, for partnering with me to dream up this program, and to Ben for being our guest today, even amidst many other engagements on Earth Day. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me and us.
And,
well, us.
I found myself enthusiastically responding to so much of your conversation, especially the parts about content versus value and true change really requiring us all to work together. Ben, your work and your outlook is just so inspiring. And I really hope that this program will help all of us here continue to think a little more about the actions that we take every day and their impact on our beautiful Earth, which we really got to take care of.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bianca, and to the Fowler Museum and Ben. This conversation, so fulfilling and a long time coming. And yeah, thank you for holding the space, Fowler Museum, Bianca, everyone who is here. This was such a pleasure.
Absolutely. Likewise, I echo all those same thank yous. And if anyone has any questions that I wasn't able to get to in the participants, feel free to DM me on Instagram. Happy to reply to them whenever they get sent over. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. This program has been recorded. It will be available immediately on Fowler Museum's Facebook and in the next few days on Instagram and on our website for you to revisit and share as you see fit. And we hope that you'll join us again for our next program. Details can be found on the closing slide. In the meantime, have a great day and a great weekend. Bye, everyone.
Bye.